You bought the perfect plants, found the ideal spot in your garden, and yet somehow they keep dying on you. Sound familiar? Here's the thing. Most beginners don't realize. Watering mistakes kill more plants than pests, diseases, and bad weather combined. Today we're counting down the 9 most common watering errors that are probably sabotaging your garden right now, and I'll show you exactly how to fix each one so your plants can finally thrive the way they're supposed to. Picture this scenario. You water your succulents the same way you water your tomatoes and wonder why half your plants are dying while the others are drowning. Different plants have completely different water needs, yet most beginners treat their entire garden like one big thirsty mouth that needs the same amount of water at the same time. Why does this kill plants so quickly? Your drought-loving lavender might need water once a week, while your water-hungry cucumber plants could need daily watering during hot summer months. When you give them all the same treatment, you're either starving some plants or drowning others. Think of it like trying to feed a hummingbird and an elephant the same portion size. What you need to understand is that plants evolved in different environments, with varying rainfall patterns. Succulents developed thick, water-storing leaves because they come from desert regions. Leafy greens like lettuce have shallow roots and thin leaves because they originally grew in consistently moist forest floors. Your vegetable garden probably contains plants from at least 5 different climate zones, each with unique water requirements. How do you fix this mistake? Start by grouping plants with similar water needs together in your garden. Put your thirsty plants like tomatoes, peppers, and squash in one area, where you can easily give them more frequent watering. Place your drought-tolerant herbs like rosemary, thyme, and oregano in a separate section where they can dry out between waterings. This simple reorganization will save you time, reduce plant stress, and dramatically improve your success rate. Now here's something even more crucial than plant grouping that most beginners completely ignore. Your neighbor waters their garden every other day and has perfect plants, so you copy their schedule exactly, and your plants still struggle. Here's the problem. You're probably dealing with completely different soil that holds and drains water in totally different ways, making their watering routine useless for your garden. Why does soil type matter so much? Clay soil acts like a sponge, holding onto water for days or even weeks, which means watering too frequently will drown your plant's roots. Sandy soil, on the other hand, drains so fast that water runs right through it like a colander, leaving your plants thirsty even after you think you've given them plenty. Loamy soil falls somewhere in the middle, but most of us don't have that perfect garden soil naturally. What happens when you ignore your soil type? Plants in clay soil develop root rot because their roots sit in waterlogged conditions for too long. Plants in sandy soil become chronically dehydrated because the water disappears before their roots can absorb it. Both scenarios lead to stressed, unhealthy plants that attract pests and diseases. How do you work with your soil instead of against it? First, do the simple jar test. Fill a clear jar with garden soil and water, shake it up, and let it settle. The layers will show you whether you have clay, sand, or loam. For clay soil, water less frequently but more deeply, and consider adding compost to improve drainage. For sandy soil, water more often in smaller amounts, and add organic matter to help retain moisture. Understanding your foundation makes everything else work better. But even perfect soil won't help if you're making this next moisture-robbing mistake. You water your garden perfectly, check the soil moisture, and within hours the surface is bone dry again, while your water bill keeps climbing. What's stealing all that moisture right out from under your plants? The answer is bare soil acting like a giant sponge left out in the sun, evaporating every drop of water you just applied. Why does exposed soil destroy your watering efforts? Think of mulch as nature's water-saving blanket. Without it, the sun beats down directly on wet soil and pulls moisture straight up into the air through evaporation. Wind makes this even worse, creating a convection effect that sucks water right out of the ground. Your plants end up competing with the atmosphere for every drop of water you give them. What most beginners don't realize is that mulch does more than just save water. It regulates soil temperature, keeping roots cooler in summer and warmer in winter. It suppresses weeds that would otherwise steal nutrients and water from your plants. As organic mulches break down, they actually improve your soil structure and add nutrients naturally. How do you fix this moisture-robbing mistake? Apply a 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch around your plants, keeping it a few inches away from plant stems to prevent pest problems. You don't need expensive store-bought mulch either. Grass clippings, shredded leaves, straw, or even shredded newspaper work perfectly. The key is creating that protective barrier between your soil and the sun. You rush out during your lunch break and blast your wilting plants with water, thinking you're saving them from the heat. Instead, you've just wasted most of that water and potentially set your plants up for disease problems later. Timing your watering wrong can turn your good intentions into a plant-killing disaster. Why does midday watering backfire so spectacularly? When you water during the hottest part of the day, most of that precious water evaporates before it can soak into the soil where your plant's roots can actually use it. You're essentially watering the air instead of your plants. Plus, water droplets sitting on leaves under intense sunlight can act like tiny magnifying glasses, potentially scorching the foliage. What about watering in the evening when it's cooler? While this seems logical, wet plants sitting in cool, humid nighttime conditions create the perfect breeding ground for fungal diseases, mildew, and bacterial problems. Your plants can't dry off properly in the dark, leaving them vulnerable to infections that can spread throughout your garden. How do you time your watering for maximum plant benefit? Water in the early morning hours, ideally between 6 and 10 a.m. This gives your plants time to absorb the moisture they need before the day heats up, while also allowing any water on the leaves to dry off quickly once the sun gets stronger. Morning watering also helps plants build up their internal water reserves to handle the stress of afternoon heat. But even perfect timing won't help if you're applying that water to the wrong part of your plants. You grab your hose and spray water all over your plants like you're giving them a refreshing shower. But here's what you don't see happening underground. Their roots are still bone dry while their leaves are soaking wet and vulnerable. Overhead watering feels natural because that's how rain works. But it's actually one of the most inefficient and dangerous ways to water your garden. Why does spraying from above cause so many problems? Plants absorb the vast majority of their water through their root systems, not their leaves. When you spray the tops of plants, most of that water either runs off the leaves or sits on the surface where it can't reach the roots that desperately need it. Meanwhile, wet leaves become breeding grounds for fungal diseases like powdery mildew, black spot, and blight that can destroy your entire crop. What makes this even worse is that overhead watering kicks up soil particles onto your plant's leaves. That soil carries bacteria, fungi, and other pathogens that can infect your plants through tiny wounds or natural openings. You're essentially giving diseases a free ride onto your plants while failing to deliver water where it's actually needed. How do you water more effectively? Aim directly at the soil around the base of each plant, keeping the water low and slow so it soaks into the root zone instead of running off. Use a watering wand with a gentle breaker head, soaker hoses or drip irrigation to deliver water precisely where plants can actually use it. Your plants will absorb more water, stay healthier, and you'll use less water overall. Speaking of consistency, that brings us to another timing mistake that stresses plants in a completely different way. For now, drop a comment below and tell me which of these watering mistakes you've been making in your own garden. You water your plants religiously for 3 days, then life gets busy and you forget for a week, then panic and flood them with water to make up for lost time. This feast or famine cycle creates more plant stress than almost any other watering mistake because it forces your plants to constantly adapt to wildly different moisture levels. Why does inconsistent watering damage plants so severely? Plants develop their root systems and internal processes based on predictable water availability. When you alternate between drought and flood conditions, their roots can't establish proper growth patterns. During dry spells, plants shut down growth and go into survival mode. When you suddenly drench them, they can't process all that water efficiently, leading to nutrient runoff and potential root problems. What makes this pattern even more destructive is how it affects plant behavior long term. Plants that experience erratic watering develop shallow, weak root systems that stay near the surface, waiting for the next unpredictable water delivery. This makes them even more vulnerable to drought stress and less capable of finding moisture during dry periods. How do you break this harmful cycle? Start by checking your plants consistently, even if you're not watering them. Stick your finger into the soil every few days to monitor moisture levels, and water based on what your plants actually need rather than arbitrary calendar dates. Keep a simple watering log on your phone or calendar to track when you last watered each area. Consider investing in a basic drip irrigation system or soaker hoses that can provide steady moisture even when your schedule gets crazy. However, even consistent scheduling won't save your plants if you're making this next devastating mistake. You see your plants looking a little droopy and immediately rush to give them more water, then water them again the next day because you want to make sure they're happy. Within a week, those same plants are dying despite all your care and attention. Here's the brutal truth. Overwatering kills more houseplants and garden plants than all other causes combined. And it happens because we love our plants to death. Why does too much water become a plant death sentence? Roots need oxygen just as much as they need water. And when soil stays constantly saturated, it pushes all the air out of the spaces between soil particles. Your plant's roots literally suffocate and begin to rot, creating a black, mushy mess that can't absorb nutrients or water properly. The plant starts showing symptoms that look exactly like underwatering, so most people respond by adding even more water. What makes overwatering so insidious is that the damage happens underground, where you can't see it until it's often too late. By the time leaves start turning yellow, wilting, or developing brown spots, the root system may already be severely compromised. Root rot spreads quickly through waterlogged soil, and once it takes hold, it's extremely difficult to reverse. How do you avoid killing plants with kindness? Learn the finger test. Stick your index finger 2 inches deep into the soil before every watering session. If it feels moist, wait another day or two before checking again. Most plants prefer to dry out slightly between waterings rather than staying constantly wet. When you do water thoroughly, but then let the soil recover. The flip side of this problem is almost as common and equally frustrating. You turn on your sprinkler system for 15 minutes every morning and feel good about giving your garden regular water, but your plants keep showing signs of drought stress despite your daily routine. When you dig down into the soil, you discover the problem. Only the top ½ inch is wet, while everything below remains bone dry. This shallow watering creates weak, vulnerable plants that can't survive hot weather or temporary water shortages. Why does surface watering fail your plant so badly? Plant roots grow where they find water, so if you only wet the top layer of soil, roots stay shallow and spread horizontally instead of growing deep. These surface roots are the first to suffer when temperatures rise or when you miss a watering session. Deep roots, on the other hand, can access moisture stored lower in the soil profile and tap into groundwater during dry spells. What happens to plants trapped in this shallow root cycle? They become completely dependent on you for survival because they can't fend for themselves. During hot weather, shallow-rooted plants wilt quickly and need constant attention. They're also more susceptible to wind damage because their root systems can't anchor them properly in the soil. How do you encourage proper root development? Water less frequently but much more deeply each time you water. Instead of 15 minutes daily, try watering for 45 minutes twice a week. Check your progress by digging down 6 inches after watering to make sure moisture penetrated that deep. This trains roots to grow downward, where they can access stable moisture reserves and makes your plants more resilient and self-sufficient. But all this watering technique means nothing if you're using the wrong equipment from the start. You've been hauling a tiny watering can back and forth across your yard for months, or worse, you're growing plants in beautiful decorative pots that don't have drainage holes, wondering why everything you plant eventually dies. The biggest watering mistake of all isn't about technique or timing. It's about using equipment that makes proper watering nearly impossible from day one. Why do the wrong tools sabotage even perfect watering knowledge? Containers without drainage holes create waterlogged death traps where excess water has nowhere to escape, leading to guaranteed root rot regardless of how carefully you water. Meanwhile, trying to water a large garden with a small watering can turns what should be a quick task into an exhausting marathon that you'll eventually start skipping or rushing through. What happens when your equipment works against you? You either give up on proper watering because it's too difficult, or you develop bad habits like underwatering large areas because your tools can't handle the job efficiently. Plants suffer because you can't deliver the right amount of water to the right places consistently. How do you set yourself up for watering success? Start with proper drainage in every container, drill holes if necessary, or choose pots designed for plants rather than decoration. For garden beds, invest in a quality hose with adjustable nozzles or install soaker hoses for hands-off watering. A hose timer can automate your watering schedule, removing the guesswork and ensuring consistency even when life gets busy. The right tools make proper watering effortless instead of exhausting. Fix these 9 mistakes and you'll be amazed at how much healthier and more resilient your plants become. Watering doesn't have to be complicated, but it does require understanding what your plants actually need instead of what feels right to us. Start with just 1 or 2 of these fixes and work your way through the list. If you want to keep your plants thriving, check out this next video for more planting tips.